This is Jerry Silverman with Adobe Systems. I'm a Senior Solutions Consultant, and it's great to be here today. Thanks for joining us. And I'm just going to go ahead and kick things off. Like Aaron mentioned, the title of this webinar is Government Success Stories with the Adobe Creative Cloud. And just to run you through the agenda really quick of how the time is going to be broken out, I'm going to take the first few minutes just to give a bit of an overview of creative technology in government, just so we can have a good foundation. And then after we've kind of set the stage, I'm going to hand it over to our guest speaker, Mr. Bellino from the U.S. Navy. And he's going to walk us through some of the success that he's had at his facility putting projects together. And then Mr. Bellino and I, for a few minutes, are going to discuss some of the best practices and some of the workflow and the infrastructure that he's established there at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island, around the creative technologies and very, very exciting stuff for you to check out. And then for the last few minutes, we'll take some Q&A, and I'll put up some resources for you to get more information about the creative technology that we talk about, and also just to answer your questions. So that being said, since you're attending this webinar, you're quite likely already very familiar with Adobe's desktop tools and the central role that they play all across government agencies for digital imaging, publishing, web design, development, and video editorial and motion graphics. So whether you are a member of a federal civilian agency or a defense agency, maybe you're part of state and local government or possibly a contractor. I actually saw in our polling pod right before we started that we've got representatives from all those different branches. So thanks again for joining. But regardless of where you fall in those government agencies, you've probably been using some combination of Photoshop, InDesign, Dreamweaver, Flash, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Acrobat for a number of years now. And before we even talk about what's new with Adobe's offerings, specifically for the government, I just wanted to take a quick look back on the world of creativity across all different domains and see how the rapid recent changes that we've been facing in the visual media landscape, regardless of industry, have presented some new visual and creative imperatives that you have to address. So in the past, most design projects that you'd encounter as a designer had a pretty specific media focus. They were primarily print first, or web first, or video first, and nary the twain shall meet, as the song goes. As a designer, you may have been focused exclusively on print media, and you used tools to create content that was meant for CMYK output, coming out through a raster image processor into the world of the physical media that you hold in your hand. Or maybe you focused on signage that would get blown up onto the side of a building, or in the case of some of our friends, plastered all over the National Mall. Or maybe you were focused on producing websites or interactive content, and so you primarily used web tools to accomplish your day-to-day job. And if you worked in video, you spent your time using cameras and in a nonlinear editing system. And if you even go further back, you were probably using reel-to-reel or quarter-inch tape, or maybe even film. So the point is, you were focused on a particular output. You focused your attention either on print or web or video, and your training would reflect that discipline. The jobs that you did reflected that specific stovepipe, and you'd rarely, if ever, cross into those other domains. And vis-a-vis the desktop tools that you would learn or go to school for, maybe take a continuing ed course or go to an online training scenario, that meant you use tools like InDesign for print layout, or Dreamweaver for web, or Flash, or Premiere Pro for video, but you were focused on that specific set of tools for the specific output. But as you may have noticed, content consumption has changed quite dramatically, and The number of screens that you're addressing went from an average computer screen or an average TV to just every dimension known to mankind, every dot per inch combination with every screen size, whether that fits in your pocket, fits in a book bag, or gets blown up on a huge screen. But not just has the consumption changed, also the creation has changed as well. And whether it's consumer use cases like what you see here, the inauguration of the most recent Pope, where everybody was taking their own kind of consumer level video with what they had available, all the way through to 4K, 8K acquisition by some of the latest DSLR cameras and high power cameras that you see coming to market. So what does this mean for a typical design project now? For example, an identity project that might include a logo or a letterhead or things like that. This new paradigm represents a shift from print first to a digital first directive, and it means that designers are now tasked to create web content and content that's going to work across multiple devices that have different screen sizes and resolutions. And this is a big change in the work required from creatives. So the creative apps and services are increasingly not living up to the creative community's expectations, because what we find is creation happens despite the workflow and not because of it. We find that assets that are created with that process are difficult to track across computers or across networks. We find that mobile devices aren't integrated tightly enough into the creative activities that we're working on. There's a continuous struggle to find effective ways to collaborate across domains, especially in when you have private and public sector together. And creative processes don't really fully embrace the benefits of the broader creative community. So creative pros are trying to piece all these things together, but it's typically quite cumbersome and complicated and piecemeal, and none of it really fits into a logical creative or collaborative workflow. And so as the world changes, so must the apps and services that we use to create. And keeping up with the rapid pace of innovation is a constant question on the minds of visual information specialists and their directors, the folks above them. So that's part of the genesis of the Creative Cloud. I'm just going to help you understand very quickly before we move ahead with our success story, what is actually in the Creative Cloud. So the Creative Cloud consists first and foremost of the creative applications that you see flashing before you now. And it also includes file sync and collaboration, plus some new services like Behance and Typekit, as well as expert services for individualized help. So for government customers, what I've found in working in this market for a number of years now, and especially this year when the Creative Cloud has become such a buzzword, is that understanding the differences between Adobe's previous offering, Creative Suite, and the Creative Cloud offering, especially where the word cloud is concerned, for government is very important. So I'll break it down like this. Beginning in 2012 with the release of CS6, Adobe's Master Collection, which are these apps on the left-hand side, were pretty much the standard bearer for all the cross-media content creation that you do. What happened in the CS6 timeframe is that we initiated a mandatory requirement for end users to validate their license via an internet-based authentication call from their desktops. And on government networks, IT administrators or those with IT or administrative access or internet access, they could prevent this end-user authentication either by packaging CS6 applications with our enterprise deployment tool, which is called AMI, or using a manual activation process for their individual client machines on a disconnected or government network. So in our Creative Cloud offering, which we began offering in 2012 and offer now continually, Adobe added over 100 new features to the pre-existing CS6 tools. Features from time-saving capabilities and camera shake reduction and dynamic web asset generation out of Photoshop, to, in some cases, completely re-architecting older applications like InDesign or Flash Professional to be more performant on modern platforms. So we rebranded these applications from CS to CC, as you see right here. Now, these apps are new applications that can live alongside CS6 applications or by themselves. And we also made additional applications available, such as Lightroom for digital photographers and our Edge tools for creating rich, responsive HTML5 websites and applications. So these new CC desktop tools can also be packaged for offline deployment using Adobe's Enterprise Deployment Toolkit. And this means that end users of these softwares will not require an active internet connection in order to use the software if they're packaged correctly with these enterprise deployment tools. So the Creative Cloud also entitles licensees to receive periodic feature updates to all of their desktop software packages. And those can also be securely deployed behind a government network using these enterprise deployment tools without requiring the end user to reach out to Adobe's servers for updates. Of course, even though Adobe's new branding says Creative Cloud, all the tools you see here are installed and run locally from desktops, just like they have in the past. And users are not going to be running these applications in their web browser or in some virtual environment. In fact, virtualizing most of these applications in a VDI scenario is not a tested or supported deployment environment currently with these applications, or at least for most of them. There are a few exceptions. So the cloud part of Creative Cloud is referring to the various online tools, services, and cloud storage capabilities offered alongside these core desktop tools. So while there are many commercial and private sector organizations that are more than happy to use cloud storage and services today, most of our government customers are not capable of adopting vendor cloud services currently. And for that reason, Adobe offers different versions of the Creative Cloud offering to different customer sets. So just to recap that, CS6 encompassed the core desktop applications on the left, whereas Creative Cloud encompasses the entire offering that you see listed here, including some online-only services. So the Creative Cloud offerings that you may see on adobe.com or through different advertisements, usually those will be the Creative Cloud for individual or teams. And those are really meant for small to medium agencies or businesses that Adobe defines as up to 99 users. And we should probably clarify that this threshold, the 99 user threshold, it's not a technical limitation of the Creative Cloud individual or team license. It's really just a business threshold, after which buying an enterprise license probably makes more financial sense for your agency. So these individual and team offerings require end-user access to software and services via an active internet connection and an Adobe ID, which is our standard ID system used on our website. So each user with a license like this has to log into Adobe server to activate the software and access in order to access their storage, their services, and also just to use the software. In fact, there are requirements to log in at various intervals or the software is going to deactivate. So for government customers whose end users are network restricted or forbidden, there are two Creative Cloud offerings: the desktop apps offering, which are, again, intended for an offline small to medium agency, and also the Creative Cloud for Enterprise, which is a customized offering for larger user populations. So this is a more kind of advanced matrix, and we're not going to go through this because we're already running over time, but it bears mentioning that these offerings are available through two different licensing agreements. The desktop apps does not include any of the cloud services, and it's available via the CLPG, whereas the enterprise offering is available via an enterprise term license agreement. And there's kind of more complete comparison matrix and contact information that you can get from this link here, which will be shared with you after the webinar. So now that we've seen what exactly the Creative Cloud is, I wanted to bring this success story to your attention. We're very excited to be able to talk about this. Now, over 2012 and 2013, there have been a lot of customer successes with the Creative Cloud, and just some of the agencies that you see here. This is not a complete list by any means, but some of these government agencies are ones that and contractors are ones that have looked at the Creative Cloud and invested in it. And one such agency is NAVSEA, and so that's why we decided to bring Mr. David Bellino in to talk to us and to tell us a little bit about his initiatives, his agency, and what he does. So just to give you a little sense of who David is, I've got a little bio here that I'll read before I hand it off. So David Bellino is a technical program manager at the U.S. Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island, and his 25-year career as a director, producer, editor, interactive multimedia designer, and game developer has spanned industries, and he's created award-winning campaigns and media for commercial and public sector customers alike. He's been a creative director and a producer for numerous films and multimedia projects for the Naval Sea Systems Command, or NAVSEA, the Office of Naval Research, the NOAA, OPNAV, Naval Research Lab, and Chief of Naval Operations Strategic Studies Group. And his multi-year effort to develop a virtual studio framework, including the Navy's first 4K visualization center, has resulted in some groundbreaking multimedia products for the Navy that we're thrilled to have him here to tell us about today. So David, again, thanks so much for joining us on this webinar, and please feel free to take it away. I'll give the Connect floor over to you.
Thank you, Jerry. You hearing me okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Great. Well, thanks to you, Adobe, and Carasoft, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just get my screen going here. All right. Hopefully you can all see a blank timeline. You're seeing that okay, Jerry?
Yep, that's good.
So first question I get is, because I have customers too in Washington and all over from the Navy, is why is someone from the Naval Undersea Warfare Center and NAVSEA coming to talk to me about creativity in terms of multimedia and films, and just doesn't seem to be the right fit. So that's the first question I get. And the answer to that essentially is a background. So I just wanted to give you a quick background in terms of the roadmap. So I like to look at it as a very intertwined career path, but it's worked out relatively well, and it's helped the Navy along the way. So starting with the Rolling Stones' first interactive product back during the Windows 95 launch for Microsoft in terms of the Start Me Up campaign, and lots of music videos before that. And then the entertainment industry was trying to figure out how to capitalize on a lot of the new media and technology for entertainment. So that's when it sort of all started, and they were like, well, who's this guy that worked at JPL NASA? I think he probably knows how to program something. And that's a lot of how it was back then. And so that was this is sort of a snapshot of all the projects. About 10 years ago, I moved to Newport, Rhode Island, and looked at carving the path to try to, bring some of this into the Navy and DoD. So what is NAVSEA and NUWC? Some of you may be familiar. NAVSEA is a system command for the U.S. Navy that engineers, builds, and maintains systems and ships for the fleet and combat systems. Very large organization, counts for nearly a quarter of the Navy's budget for acquisition, training. 60,000 deep, civilian military, over 150 acquisition programs, and foreign military sales as well. So as our corporate headquarters, I'm in Newport, Rhode Island, which is one of the shore facilities, and that's the undersea component of NAVSEA. So hopefully that gives you some perspective for those of you who are not familiar, and where that fits into the Navy as a whole is a system command underneath the U.S. Navy organization. So with the background that I gave you, coming into the Navy was kind of an interesting, where do you fit? Where does this guy belong? And so my role essentially has been to come in and say, hey, I think creativity and a creative director is necessary. I mean, we have communication products. We have lots of products that scientists and engineers and mathematicians and people still need to communicate their work. And it needs to look good. It needs to communicate well. So there's a need here on the creative side. And that could be for training. It could be for public affairs. It could be for information, for education, training, and so forth. So that was my primary focus. As you can imagine, it's not difficult to navigate. It is difficult, I should say, to navigate the, how we get things done in terms of acquisition, especially with things like this. So that's a challenge unto itself, and that's probably a webinar unto itself. But in that role, I have to be responsible for these products, and obviously being responsible for taxpayer dollars and for the U.S. government to make sure the products are what they need and they're serving their purpose. So that's an important responsibility. One of the things that I kind of jumped on several years ago was high resolution and ultra high def, and we actually put in one of the first 4K display centers, as well as media labs, which is used for modeling and simulation and visualization, scientific data visualization, as well as producing media for communications. I'll talk about that a little bit. The difference between that and the virtual studio is, how do we collaborate with internally as a government, creatively with products, as well as with, of course, industry and academia. It's critical. So building the structure for that is another, probably one of my primary responsibilities. And lastly and recently, to provide a vision and a roadmap for digital media in general, both on the content and the technology side for all the systems. So NAVSEA is the Naval Sea Systems Command, but there's also NAVAIR, the naval from an air perspective of a command. There's SPAWAR, space communications. There's NAVFAC, which is facilities, NAVSEA. So the civilian recruiting world is an interesting one, and to make sure we attract the right individuals and to have the right skills is important. So I think the things above that I described are important aspects of ensuring we have the right workforce. So that's the effort that I'm in the middle of now. Project portfolio is pretty wide. It's not just film, but it is interactive products, web, mobile, kiosks, broadcast, a number of products. So these are just a few. They're customers. The way we essentially work is that, we also have customers. I may have the energy office or the chief of naval operations strategic studies group or whatever it may be that has a need for a product. And again, that could be a number of things from video to interactive. And it's also my job to recommend what it is they do need. A lot of times they don't. A lot of times your customer kind of knows what they want in some form, but you have to help them get there and deliver the right product. So it's a wide array from all the organizations that Jerry mentioned, and plus several more, and lots of different topics and lots of different purposes. The one over on the far bottom right is kind of interesting. That's the one that says ONR, Office of Naval Research, NOAA, Partnership Runs Deep. That was our first broadcast documentary. And the reason why that was a really interesting project to me is that I was brought on as the data visualization guy. They were sending 14 unmanned undersea vehicles out to look for historic shipwrecks, Revolutionary War shipwrecks around the Newport, Rhode Island area. And it was a partnership between the Office of Naval Research and NUWC and NOAA, University of Rhode Island. So it was a really interesting collaborative project that involved science, technology, oceanographers, archaeologists, and I basically brought up the idea of, hey, I think the best way to document this event, it was a 2-week event, is to make a documentary and an interactive product, because after these types of events, a lot of times people have a bunch of PowerPoint slides, and not so good. So we actually did a pretty interesting project, and it's a broadcast 24-minute for commercial break NBC documentary, and it probably did more for that event than anything else, because it really brought to the public the value of the partnerships between the Navy and private sector and academia, and it was really pretty interesting. So I just wanted to point that one out from a video standpoint. On the other side of the coin, we have 4K display media lab. So one of my goals here is to make sure we're also tackling the scientific data visualization side and visual information systems. So storytelling is obviously a huge part of what I do, but there's also an aspect of the technology and seeing things better, seeing things clearer, using technology to help you, especially when you're surrounded by 4,000 engineers and scientists in the organization. So modeling and simulation is also my background from Jet Propulsion Lab and from my early days at NUWC, and how scientific data visualization and visual effects, and that was sort of the interesting blend, is that the visual effects community in Hollywood and scientific data visualization have a lot in common. And I think that's another webinar unto itself. But that's kind of what's going on here as part of this effort. It's a physical display center. It has a lot of compute power behind it. It's got connectivity. It's got all the elements. And then we really focus on content and trying to visualize things in ways that people aren't visualizing things yet today in this community. So virtual studio. Again, another topic for another time. But this is an architecture that's put together to make sure that we can collaborate the way we should be able to collaborate. From a government perspective to private industry to academia, how is this all working? How do we get the best bang for the buck and use the right components and deliver the right content to the right people, but behind the scenes doing it the right way? There's an architecture behind that involves all sorts of things. As you can imagine, I'm sure you all know, you have IT, you have IA, you have contracts, you have a workforce with skills and talents and training, and you have a lot of different components that go into deciding how you're going to run your facility or your organization. And so I've elected to do something, I think, a little different. People will either tend to try to run everything inside and bring, sort of the typical, here's our organization, we do this work, or they'll contract things out. That's another typical way from a business model standpoint of, we'll just supervise it and we'll, send out a contract. But there's lots of other more interesting ways and better ways that I believe that it could be done. So this is the construct for, it's just a generic term, it's not any particular name, but this is sort of, it's meant to be an eye chart, only because, again, it's a very deep topic, but just to let you know that what you're essentially looking at is eventually a cloud-based, solution that has an offline and an online and has all the things that Jerry talked about, which is why Adobe has been, critical and trying to move this forward, because there's a lot of steps, as you can imagine. This has to go through phases. You can't just throw all this, on an organization at one time. You have to work through the policies and work through the, the challenges, one thing at a time, and you have to do it right. So I'm going to take you just through a couple of examples. Let me see what we're at here. 2:30, so I guess maybe 10 minutes. I will take you through some examples, web, kiosk, mobile demos, and how we use some of the tools, what the products are, so you can get like a specific example of, what are these guys making. I think because I was going to show you a few things from Reflector, I think I'm going to just bring up a couple of things on my laptop, then I'm going to pass it back to Jerry, who at the end of my slides will bring up a couple of more examples, and I can talk through those because you'll be seeing something from an iPhone directly and from an iPad directly. I want to talk a little bit about what's called NEMO. NEMO stands for the Naval Acoustic Effects Model. And it's a really interesting project that involves the protection of our environment and marine mammals and putting sound in the water, when the Navy, has very important operational testing and training to do. Marine mammal protection, environmental protection while that's going on. So very interesting project that I was handed, and that is controversial, as you can imagine. There's certain sides of the fence that are one way, and certain sides that are other, and they're both important, very important things. The Navy needs to continue and to train and to test new technology, but we have to protect our environment and marine mammals. So I was asked to help along the lines, and I'll show you a little bit of that as well. Energy. Energy is a very, very big topic when it comes to energy security of energy, reliance on fossil fuel, and culture change, behavioral change. So again, another very interesting topic that the Navy is very much involved with that I was asked to come in and help with. Probably saw a little mocap guy there, probably not playing too well, but the STEM program. A lot of what we do it's very important to make sure the next generation and our young workforce and our students, are engaged, going back to sort of that recruiting concept for a minute. So we like to make sure that there's always a component there, hopefully, if products can spin off to the STEM community. And STEM, if you're not familiar, is the science, technology, engineering, and math community of making sure kids, stay interested in the science and math areas and make the country better in the future from that perspective. So these are, again, just some examples of products and projects. I wanted to give you a little bit more specific flavor of some of the things we do. The Nauticus Museum in Norfolk, Virginia is putting together a large Navy exhibit, and we've produced several animated, really visual effects pieces of Navy missions to give museum goers a really, in-depth look at, how the Navy does certain things like search and rescue and precision anchoring and all kinds of things like that. So we also produce pieces for museums and kiosks. So that really lends itself to the web. These are web products. These play in a browser. They could be video. They could be broadcast. They could be delivered on, obviously, iPad, on mobile, and obviously we know that the web is really more of a delivery mechanism right now in terms of getting content to places, versus just bringing up a web browser. So we're starting to use the web for those types of things. DPS, so digital publications, these have become important to us for a couple of reasons. We've basically, there's two projects right now, the energy project and Navy training for a lightweight torpedo project. We're building a digital publication and a series of products for that topic. So I will show you a little bit of that. I'll just flip through a couple of pages of that for you in a minute, but I want to just kind of reinforce the importance of the digital publication concept, and actually all of them, because again, when I sit down with somebody, it depends on who they're delivering to, how they're going to be looking at the content. Do they need to interact with the content? What type of devices are we talking about? There's just so many questions involved that we've seen, a lot of my answers of what these products are going to be at the end be very wide in, a wide array of options. So this is, again, just some of the artwork, and this is all fully animated and being put into both Flash and HTML5, as well as straight video for the web and for mobile and broadcast. Just give you a little bit of a look at some of the creative. So let me actually, before I jump to that, let me just show you real quick Nemo. So what is Nemo? The Navy Acoustic Effects Model. This was a package of 22 videos that the intent was we're going to be floating around the underwater here looking at, different aspects of the ocean. And we're going to be essentially teaching you why it's important to do modeling and simulation. I'm not going to play the videos here just because we're on Connect, but I just want you to see the amount of content here. So we're going to take you deeper and deeper into this concept of an underwater circuit board. It's almost like a simulation, like the Matrix under the water. And there's lots of content, lots of videos, but they all align to the common theme and they all take you deeper and deeper. Just like you're going in the metaphor deeper under the ocean, we're taking you deeper, deeper technically into the understanding of how the model works. So it's pretty neat where if you go all the way back to the top and you want to listen to the Admiral talk about his very high, the high-level objectives of why this is important, you can also dive all the way down the bottom right into the simulation itself and get into the math and the science of sound speed profiles, of environmental averaging, of OML database. So it's kind of interesting because if the user is just someone who is more of an environmentalist who wants to just understand the importance and what the Navy's doing, that's one thing. If you're an engineer or a scientist or someone who really says, hey, wait a minute, what are you guys really doing and how does this model work? Lots of content, over an hour worth of content in here, and there's a little fuse on the circuit board that takes you back on the site map, and you can explore dolphins and different mammals and things like that. So this is the web version. We also have, it also runs obviously on the iPad, and then there's an iPhone version, which Jerry may bring up. It's just a very basic interface, but again, very important that folks who have an iPhone who may want to check out some of these videos can do that. So that's that. The other thing I'm going to show you really quickly is the GPS slides for the training video. And this is what it'll look like. And the concept here is that we are showing folks this particular system that the Navy has at a very, very high, public available content level, and how it works, and the importance of Navy testing and training. But this is just a little look at the interface, the built-in videos, all of the really, really cool things you can do with, obviously some of the tools that we'll talk about. All right, and the last thing, since we're about at 2:40, let me just run through these last slides relatively quickly here.
Yeah, and I went a few minutes long, Dave. So I think you can feel free to go a few minutes over. And
okay, I'll just be a couple of minutes, and let me wrap all that up by saying that it's a very large pipeline that is a professional pipeline that's all the way from creative development, pre-production, production, all the way through delivery and distribution. So as everybody knows, there's a lot of people involved on that second layer. And the government doesn't have all those people, and industry, there's experts that are, think about the subject matter and the content of, acoustic modeling for marine mammals. Well, that involves a lot of people to understand that side. It involves a lot of production people. So it's a very collaborative thing. Asset management is again, one of those. So I guess I'll say it again. It's another webinar onto its own, right? Very big topic, but very, very, very important, especially for our organization who wants to make sure that these products that are built and paid for, get reused properly, right? Because, you don't want to keep making the same submarine model 17 times. And that can happen if you're not, careful. So, and then there's the whole delivery side on the right. We're limited in certain things that we can view, like in our case in the Navy, we have NMCI, which you just need to make sure that if your users are going to be, operating in that environment, that you either go through, in this case, IE8 web browser compatible, and of course, if you're making a mobile app too, well, you probably need to make 3 or 4 or 5 different products because, that's the environment we live in. SharePoint, for instance, if you're doing digital media management or digital asset management, and you want some of these products to be viewed within those standard environments, like those database simple folder structure things, be able to stream video, download it. It's important that you do that. Lots of high-end tools down the bottom, which, the government doesn't so much get into that, with the exception of course, the one on the bottom left, which is the Adobe. So that's a good bridge. So finally, we use the whole suite, from obviously the early stage concepts, things like story and, all the natural characters here that people normally would use, of course, on the image side of Photoshop and Bridge, and everybody's very familiar, even so much on the video side, which I'm sure a lot of you are in terms of Premiere and After Effects and, Media Encoder. So all of these are important. And, of course, down the bottom right is is critical, because this is, how we're going to get to deliver to our end users. And the only thing I'll say, the last thing I'll say on this part is, when Jerry described the offline deployment and the online deployment, the way we're constructing this is we realize the challenges, and I guess that's what we'll get into a little bit on the Q&A. But yeah, there's a big challenge in terms of what has to be offline, what could be online, what do we do inside, how do we work outside, and then the types of content. I mean, that's a huge issue, right? Because you have distribution A, which is public release content. All of that content needs to be approved public A before it goes out. If you're working together with a contractor, there's certain levels of, and again, we're talking about a very, very high level public stuff here, but all of this could still be applied to any type of content. But I guess you got to ask yourself first, the main question is your content, your IA aspect, if you will. And that kind of dictates your architecture, because really it's all about IA. It's not so much an IT thing, because, technically all this stuff is possible, and, we can figure out, should we buy certain licenses, and should we host this internally or whatever. So it's really about the information assurance question and the type of content you're going to be working with, which dictates the rest of the equation. So anyway, that's how Adobe fits into our pipeline, and hopefully that was helpful to you. So I'll pass it back to you, Jerry.
That was really great, Dave. Thank you for that. I have pulled up on my screen. If I just take 1 second here to pull it up using the Reflector application. I have pulled up on my iPhone the NEMO site that Dave and his team created. Again, the Navy acoustic effects model. So as you were probably seeing before, from the actual web browser, when you ping this URL, which is nemo.us, from kind of an average web browser, you'll get that kind of more kind of optimized experience for the web browser. If you reach it on an iPad, you'll obviously get more kind of customized iPad experience. And then for the phone, you have a little bit of responsive design there. And it's pretty obvious to me when I look at this project, Dave, and I was telling this, I was saying this earlier, that when I look at this project, it's pretty obvious to me that at least some, if not the entire piece, was done using Adobe tools, whether it's Illustrator and Photoshop to actually do the design. But even in these transitions, which as you can see are running in a web browser on an iPad, which as we know doesn't support the Flash Player plugin, the HTML5 based CSS and JavaScript transitions that we're seeing when I touch these particular aspects, and we see that beautiful transition, I imagine that was probably also done using an Adobe tool like Edge Animate or something like that.
Yeah, it ran really through the whole pipeline. And again, early on, we knew iPad was a big one, because a lot of this is being used at conferences and environmental conferences and things like that. And then absolutely, we knew we're also going to have a Navy NMCI issue, and we have to have an Internet Explorer 8 Flash version. And then, of course, the phone, we just want to be able to access the key videos in a very simple interface. But yes, I mean, obviously your pipeline played a role in all that.
Right. And there was another project that I had seen that you had that you'd completed as part of the initiative for talking about energy conservation in the Navy, which I just pulled up using the Adobe Content Viewer. So maybe, I know you pulled it up initially, but maybe you could talk us through that for a sec.
Yeah, one of the great companies that we work with, and we talk a lot about how we're going to do this. And it was recommended to me that for now, while we're in the mode of trying to get these concepts developed, that we put it in a container that people can see the iPad demo. And we thought the Content Viewer was a great solution for that until we get through the production aspect of doing this for real, and exporting an app and building apps for Android and iOS. So this was a great solution for us to be able to go to the customer and say, here's what this is going to look like. and it was very successful. And matter of fact, I'm heading down there next week to the Pentagon, and we're continuing to strategize on finishing the product. So there's a little bit of a 3D there if you kind of move around. Yep, we have 3D built in, videos built in.
I'm just swiping my finger across that to kind of work,
Yep.
type of thing.
So there's really great plans for this concept, and again, the tool set was really good because rapid prototyping is so important because we really need to show things quickly and show what these ideas are. And even if the final product may not specifically be designed that way, and we have to code some extra stuff, this is an incredible way to communicate your vision of what you're trying to do.
And so I'm actually viewing this using the Adobe Viewer, which is the kind of front end to be able to view your prototype compositions when you put this together, when you put these layouts together and the interactivity together within design using the digital publishing suite, which is actually part of the whole Creative Cloud offering. So that being said, so again, thank you so much, Dave, for showing us some of those projects. I mean, I think they're some of the more compelling things. Having worked in the government sector, I mean, I've seen some really amazing work, but this is right up there at the top of that list. And just looking at NEMO and at the Energy PSA and some of those other projects, some of the discussion points that I wanted to go through, and I realize we don't have as much time as we initially wanted, but maybe you could just characterize just a few of the technical challenges that you've encountered in spearheading this kind of bleeding edge use of creative tech in your virtual studio framework.
Yeah, I would say at the top of the technical challenges would be the IT and the IA environment that we're working inside the gates per se, and there's lots of rules and there's lots of issues to deal with. So the technical challenges really are to make sure you sit down with your IT folks and your IA folks and everyone who is going to be involved in the technical framework of what it is you're trying to do. Not the creative side, because we go to our customers and we know what we need to do. And more times than not, the challenges are not customer relations, they're not communication, they're not creative, they're technical, in a sense of process and rules and regulations, more so than technical challenges you probably wanted me to talk about more. I would say, we don't have a lot of technical challenges. I think today there's so many tools out there that can help you, whether you're flipping 4K or doing editing, or I don't see a lot of my problems have being technical. They're more process and procedural.
Right.
And then I think
so selling the value of kind of rapidly innovating on a platform, or kind of looking forward from, for one example, HD to 4K, which a lot of broadcasters are still making that transition now. But so it sounds like the communication across all those different stakeholders is one best practice. Are there any others that you can recommend?
I think from a best practices standpoint, you have to look at the landscape and really understand where the best talent sits and then how to get to them. And that's more of a structure, more of a workflow structure, because it crosses boundaries between government agencies and then outside and back and forth. So best practices have to be to look at that landscape and figure out who the right talent is for the job, and then apply the tools. Probably more so than anything is people get inundated with the next cool bells and whistles, and you've got to use the right tool for the job. You got to use the right tool for the job, and I would just say keep that in mind in terms of what is really necessary, what is really needed for the job, and don't get caught up in the next latest and greatest thing quickly because it's out there, but feel comfortable in the tools that you know.
So you mentioned all of that cross-domain communication that has to happen amongst IT and procurement and contractors and facilities and NMCI, which is the Navy Marine Corps intranet that you have to, that has its own very kind of technical challenges. But more than technical, they're also cultural. And so I'm wondering, your thoughts on working together, because obviously you have private industry experience with, kind of best practices or getting over the cultural humps and bringing those types of groups together to collaborate.
Yeah. So there's three things, and I'll try to be quick. I know we only have a couple minutes. The first thing is I find generation gap. I find, I find the digital natives, digital immigrants in terms of the age separation of being familiar with the new tools. I find in my organization there's a lot of folks who are, maybe a few years from retirement, but it's very much heavily weighted towards that in some cases. And they need to be part of this. This is where the intellectual property lies in the science and the technology of being there for 40 years. So you have to be able to communicate with them and not make them feel threatened, right, by, the new, 22-year-old on the block type of thing. And it doesn't have to be that way, and that's a huge part of hopefully what this does. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is government and private industry and academia. And there's always a competitive type of thing, right? I mean, everyone's always, has something in the back of their mind about being threatened a little bit in terms of, that whole structure. And again, it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think if you set up a network this way, I think that goes away. That feeling of friction, if you will, can go away, and everyone's working on the same thing. The third part is customer. It's really trying to make sure a lot of people making decisions, and the decision makers, again, I guess that's more of an age thing too as well, and a cultural thing, is to make them feel comfortable that this is the right, it's new, it feels very new to people, and they're scared, especially when you start talking cloud. And I think you really have to clarify what it is that means, because there's a misperception. So.
Great. And the that is really, I really do appreciate that insight. Especially with a lot of the government folks that I work with being in the technology industry. That is those are some great insights. Right. The feeling threatened, or that kind of digital natives versus digital immigrants, and the kind of cultural right. issues that need resolution there. But I guess the last part, and we don't have to spend too much time on this because I know we wanted to leave some time for Q&A with the audience, but any advice from the procurement, acquisition, deployment of how government agencies can keep pace with the innovations that are emerging from industry?
Yeah. So what's nice, if you look at the question, the Q&A structure here, we're really talking about challenges, right? We're talking about technical challenges. We're talking about cultural. I think one of the biggest is procurement and acquisition, fitting the right model to do what it is we're talking about doing. So if we have this vision of, this framework, and it involves tools, and it involves people, and it involves, all of the stuff we're talking about, what's underlying all that is the right acquisition framework to be able to execute. And sometimes that's not there, and it's not. So it has to be changed. It has to evolve. Just the way everything else is evolving. Technology evolves, people evolve, training evolves, acquisition and procurement has to evolve and keep up, because the problem is that if your acquisition and procurement is, 1991 and Creative Cloud is coming out, yes, there's IA issues that you talk about that have to be resolved, and there's IT issues, but those can all be worked out. But what can't be worked out is not being able to acquire something, whether it's a person's skill or whether it's a piece of software or a piece of hardware. So all of the things that you talk about here and the questions are basically intertwined together. The technical challenges, the cultural, and the acquisition are all one big cobweb that we need to iron out.
Great. Well, again, just we're so happy that you were able to join us on this. And with the time that we have left over, I was going to go ahead and kick it back to Erin.